They say memory fades with time, but some things stay clear no matter how many years pass. I may be old now, with hands twisted by age and eyes that see more through feeling than through sight. But I remember that morning like it happened just yesterday. The sun hadn't even touched the fields when I opened my eyes, and I could feel something heavy in the air, not like a storm, no. It was quieter than that, like the way the sky looks right before the wind shifts. I was just a boy then, no more than 6 or 7, too young to know the ways of the world, but old enough to sense when something was wrong. My mother, she was already awake. I could hear her humming that soft tune she always used when she didn't want me to worry. She had a voice like warm cloth, gentle, wrapped in sorrow she never spoke out loud. I peeked through the slats of our small cabin and saw her sitting by the door, hands clasped, eyes staring off like she was listening to something far away. She turned when she heard me move, and she smiled. It was a smile I didn't understand back then. Not really. It wasn't joy. It was something else, like she was trying to hold the moment still. She reached for me, pulled me into her lap, and started braiding my hair. I remember how careful she was with each strand, like each one mattered. She kept looking over her shoulder, listening, not to the birds or the wind, but to the silence that sat thick outside. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer. She just kept braiding. Her hands trembled once, then steady. That was the only warning I had. That, and the way she held me just a little tighter when she was done. You remember this song, baby, she whispered and began to sing low. I still hum that tune to this day, even though the words are half lost to me now. It was a song her mother sang to her. She said, a song about holding on when the world pulls you apart. I didn't know what it meant then, but I sang with her, softly. Our voices met in the middle like the branches touching across a river. The sun finally began to climb, casting golden light across the worn floor. It should have been a beautiful day, but I remember thinking it felt more like an ending than a beginning. Then we heard them, hooves first, then footsteps, loud voices, sharp commands. Everything moved too fast and too slow all at once. My mother stood up and pulled me behind. Her body was shaking, but her voice was calm. She told me to stay quiet, to do what I was told, to be strong. She kissed my forehead 3 times. That was her way of saying I love you. I felt it burn into my skin. When the men came, they didn't look at her. They looked at me. One pointed, the other nodded, and before I could blink, her arms were no longer around me. I screamed, I think I screamed, but the sound didn't change anything. She fought. I remember that. She wasn't strong like the men, but she fought like a mother whose child was being torn away. They pulled me from her, and I saw her fall to her knees. That image, her reaching out, fingers clawing the dirt like she could drag the earth back toward her, that image lives in me forever. They told her not to make a fuss, that it was time, that I'd be taken care of. But she knew better, and so did I, though I didn't understand why. As they carried me away, I twisted to look at her one last time. She had gotten to her feet, clutching that old cloth doll she had sewn for me, the one with buttons for eyes. She held it like it was me. She never cried, not once. She just stared, and in her stare, I saw 1,000 words that never got spoken. That was the last morning I saw my mother, and for all the years I've lived, nothing has ever filled that empty space. You see, when you're taken from someone who loves you more than air, something inside you goes quiet. A part of you becomes a shadow, waiting, listening, hoping that maybe, just maybe, you'll hear their voice again. But I never did. I carried her memory through fields, across roads, into cabins and towns that tried to crush the soul out of me. I held onto her voice like a candle in the dark. And now, as this old voice tells you my story, I begin with her, because before they took my freedom, they took her, and in many ways, that was the beginning of everything. I don't remember the names of the men who came for me that morning. I never knew them, and they never asked for mine. But I remember their boots, the sound they made on the hard earth. Heavy, final. I remember the dust that rose with every step, how it caught the light like ashes floating in the sun. I remember one of them had a scar that split his cheek like lightning through stone, and the other smelled of sweat and iron. But mostly, I remember their hands rough and cold, like they'd forgotten what it meant to touch something gently. I didn't understand what was happening, not completely. I knew they had come for me, but I didn't know why. I was too small to know about money, about ownership, about the kind of world where people could be passed around like sacks of cotton. But I knew enough to be afraid. My mother tried to shield me. She stood in front of me like a wall of flesh and love, but her body wasn't strong enough to stop them. One man pushed her aside not with hate, just with indifference, like she was furniture in the way. I felt her fingers slip from mine, and that's when I knew this wasn't a dream. This wasn't a game. This was real. I tried to run to her, but one of the men grabbed me by the arms and lifted me like I weighed nothing. I kicked and twisted, screamed her name until my throat burned, but it didn't matter. She was crying now, silent tears, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than pain. The doll she'd made me lay in the dirt, face down, and she didn't even look at it. Her eyes were on me, only on me. I remember yelling, "Mama, Mama," over and over, like the sound of her name could change what was happening. But it didn't. They carried me past the fields, past the cabin, past everything I had known. The sun was higher now, and everything looked bright. I felt like I was leaving one world and falling into another, a world without her. A world where the only thing I had was her voice in my head and the memory of that morning. That's the thing about being taken. You don't lose just one thing. You lose everything at once. The voice that called you to eat, the hands that brushed the dirt off your knees, the arms that wrapped around you at night. In one moment, they're all gone. They put me in the cart with wooden sides too tall to climb. Inside, there were others, boys like me, some younger, some older. None of us spoke. What could we say? Our lives had just been cracked in half, and no words could glue them back together. I sat in the corner, knees pulled to my chest, and stared at the sky. The clouds moved like they always did. The wind blew the same way it had yesterday. But I was different. Something inside me had changed. Not broken, no, not yet, but bent in a way that would never fully straighten again. The road was long and bumpy. With every turn, I hoped we were going back. That somehow this was all a mistake, and they'd return us to our mothers, our homes, the voices that made us feel safe. But we didn't go back. We never went back. The trees grew thinner. The land changed color, and the scent in the air turned to something unfamiliar. I watched everything pass by, trying to memorize it, thinking maybe, if I remembered, every tree, every rock, I could find my way home someday. But the truth is, home isn't just a place. It's a person, and she was behind me now, too far to reach. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. Or maybe I just shut my eyes so that I stopped seeing. When I opened them again, the sky was darker, and the car had stopped. We were in front of a large building. It was quiet, but the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I could hear the sound of chains clinking. Though I never saw them, I could hear voices low, cold, giving orders. The door opened and we were told to get out. We obeyed without thinking. Not because we weren't thinking, but because we were learning, even in that moment, what it meant to survive. The man with the scar looked at me again, not with hate, not even with curiosity, just as if I were an item on a list. He pointed, and someone led me away. The others disappeared behind doors or fences. I never saw them again. I never even learned their names. That's how it was. You learn not to ask questions, not to get too close. People vanished too easily. That night, I lay on the hard floor of a small room, alone. I stared at the ceiling, wishing it was the sky. I imagined my mother's face. I tried to hear her voice. I thought about the way her hands felt when they held mine. I promised myself I'd find her again, that no matter where they took me, I'd hold onto her memory like it was a rope pulling me through the dark. Because if I let go of that, I'd be lost forever. And so, I kept her with me in every step I took, in every order I followed. In every night I cried quietly into my arms so no one would hear. They may have taken me from her, but they couldn't take her from me. And that was the only comfort I had in those first days of being gone. The new place didn't look like home. It didn't sound like it, didn't smell like it, didn't feel like it. Everything about it was wrong. The sky above the fields seemed heavier, like the clouds pressed down harder here. The dirt was darker, drier. There were trees, but they didn't dance in the wind like the ones back home. They just stood still, like they were listening, watching. I didn't speak for the first few days. I barely moved. I kept expecting to wake up, to find myself back in my mother's arms, her voice humming that same old melody. But that dream never came, not once. And in its place was the cold bite of reality, sharp and silent. I slept in the corner of a small shed with walls that breathed wind. The floor was earth, and the blanket was my own arms. At night, I curled up tight, afraid the dark would steal what little I had left inside. I didn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know if I could stop once I started. There were others, boys and girls like me, older folks too. Their eyes told their stories. You didn't have to ask. Some looked like they'd stopped hoping long ago. Others gave me soft glances, a nod here, a broken smile there. One old man handed me a piece of dry bread the first evening. He didn't say a word, just pressed it into my hand, then walked away. That's how kindness worked. They're not loud, not proud, just quiet and necessary. Everything was done under watchful eyes, eyes that didn't blink, eyes that belonged to people who barked orders in low, tired voices, the kind of voices that never needed to yell to be feared. We rose before the sun and went to sleep long after it fell. Days blended into each other like spilled ink on cloth, no edges, no clear lines. I was assigned to carry buckets and clean tools. I had never done such things before. My hands weren't strong enough, not yet. I dropped things. I moved too slowly. I learned quickly that mistakes came at a cost, not in shouts or strikes, but in the way people stopped looking at you, stopped helping. You had to keep up. You had to prove you could hold your own, otherwise you faded into the background. And in a place like that, fading was dangerous. So I watched. I copied the older ones. I learned how to move silently, how to use my body without wasting effort. I learned to listen for footsteps, to sense when silence meant trouble. I became a shadow that moved when needed and vanished when not. Food was rationed, simple, tasteless, but it kept us upright. Sometimes, someone would sneak me an extra bite, half a potato, a piece of apple with a bruise. Those small moments became treasure. I learned to say thank you with my eyes. Words were precious, and we spent them carefully. Nights were the hardest. That's when the memories came. That's when I'd hear my mother's voice, not as a sound, but as a feeling warmth around my chest, a hush in my ear. I'd whisper back to her, pretending she could hear me. I'm still here, Mama. I'd say, I'm still holding on. And somehow, that made it easier to sleep. There was no comfort in the place itself, only in the people who hadn't lost all of themselves yet. A woman named Elsie took to me. She was tall, quiet, with hands that looked like they'd dug 100 graves and still had dirt under the nails. She never smiled, but she had a way of making space near her feel safe. She taught me how to lift without breaking my back, how to tie knots that held firm. She didn't speak of the past, but I could tell hers was full of storms. I trusted her, even when I didn't know why. Trust was rare, but when it came, you held onto it. As days turned into weeks, I began to feel something return, not hope exactly, but rhythm. A beat to walk to, a sense of time that meant survival. I stopped waiting to be rescued. That thought became too painful. Instead, I focused on surviving. Each day, one chore at a time, one breath at a time, and always, I carried my mother with me. In my posture, in my silence, in the way I held onto the few good things left. I was no longer a child, not really. Not in the way children are supposed to be, but I was still me, somewhere deep down. I was still the boy who listened to his mother's song and believed he might one day sing it back to her. They didn't raise their voices, not even once. The ones who helped me survive didn't speak in loud tones or tell me what to do. Like the overseers did, their words came in whispers, like wind weaving through tall grass. And those whispers carried lessons more powerful than anything shouted from a place of fear. I was still a child when I met the men and women whose faces looked carved by years of sun and sorrow. They had seen more than I could imagine, lost more than they ever said, and yet somehow they kept giving, not because they had much, but because they knew what it meant to have nothing. One of them was Clara. That's what everyone called her. No one used last names where we were. Names were given and taken too easily, so we held tight to what little was ours. Clara had a back, curved like a question mark, and eyes that had seen far beyond the fences. She never asked where I came from. She didn't need to. One look and she knew I was just like all the others who had been torn from something soft and dropped into something cold. She called me child of the wind, said I had a restless spirit, one that wouldn't let the dirt settle on my heart. I didn't understand her at first, but I liked the way she said it, like it was something good, something strong. Clara taught me how to listen not just with my ears, but with my skin, my breath, my stillness. If you sit long enough, she said, the land will talk to you. I tried it once, sitting out behind the shed after chores. I closed my eyes and just breathed. I didn't hear words, but I felt something shift, like the earth was reminding me I was still part of it, even if everything else had been taken away. That night, Clara told stories by firelight, not loud, not long, just enough. Tales of ancestors who crossed oceans, of spirits who walked beside us even when we were alone. She never said they were true or false. That wasn't the point. The point was to keep them alive, to pass them on, to remind us that we came from something, that we weren't just born in bondage, but had roots deeper than the chains they put around us. Others spoke to. An old man named Moses, his real name long forgotten, used to hum while he worked. At first I thought it was just a tune, but one day I realized it was a message, a rhythm with a pattern. This is how we remember, he told me. They can take your words, but they can't take your memory if you wrap it in music. I started to hum too, quietly, songs I made up, Songs I thought maybe my mother had sung. It helped me sleep. It helped me feel like I still had something no one could steal. There was a girl named Ruth, not much older than me. She taught me how to make small things, tiny dolls from straw. Little knots that could carry secret meanings. You pass this to someone, she said, and they know they're not alone. We weren't allowed to show affection openly, but in those small gifts, we found a way to say, I see you. I began to understand that survival wasn't just about food or strength. It was about holding on to something inside that couldn't be taken. Your stories, your name, your will, and most of all, your hope. These people gave me pieces of that every day. Little by little, I gathered them, wove them into myself like patches on old cloth. Sometimes the pain was too much, the days too long, the silence too heavy. But then someone would nod at me, or press a sweet potato into my palm, or leave a rock shaped like a heart by my sleeping place. No words, just gestures, quiet declarations that I was still here, that we were still human. And so I became a keeper of those voices. I remembered what Clara whispered, what Moses hummed, what Ruth tied in thread. I carried them with me not just in memory, but in action. I learned to speak softly, to watch closely, to give even when I had little. That's what they taught me, not through lessons, but through presence, through endurance, through the sacred act of staying alive with dignity intact. The world we lived in tried to erase us, to flatten us into silence. But these voices, they carved me back into shape, gave me form, gave me breath. And now, as I tell this story, I've realized their voices never stop. They live in my own. Every time I speak, I carry them with me, and I always will. They say children are made to play, to run, to fall, and get back up, to laugh without reason. I never had that, not the way most do. I lost childhood before I even knew what it was. Not because I did something wrong, but because the world I was thrown into didn't allow space for softness, for joy, for the innocence that should have been mine. From the moment I was old enough to stand without falling, they put tools in my hands, tools too heavy for my fingers, buckets too wide for my grip, tasks that made my back ache before I even learned how to spell the word pain. I remember the first time I was sent to the field. The road stretched out farther than I could see, like an ocean of green and brown. The sun had barely risen, but the heat was already biting. They told me where to go and what to do. I didn't ask questions. You didn't ask. You moved. You obeyed. You learned through doing or through hurting. My hands blistered before the first hour passed. My arms trembled. My knees buckled more than once. No one offered to help. That wasn't how things worked. If you cried, they ignored it. If you stopped, they noticed. And that kind of attention wasn't something you wanted. So I kept going, mouth shut, eyes lowered, heart thudding like a drum. I couldn't quiet. The days blurred into each other. Sunrise meant work. Sunset meant a few bites of food and a few hours of sleep before it all started again. Rest was not rest. It was a pause, just long enough to survive the next round. I watched others older, stronger, faster, and I tried to match them. But I was small. I wasn't fast. My muscles were still growing, but the demands didn't care. I dropped things. I made mistakes. And mistakes meant someone else had to fix them. And that someone didn't always forgive easily. I learned to listen with my whole body. To the way footsteps approached. To the tone of a voice. To the silence that followed certain orders. That silence was often louder than shouting. It meant disappointment. It meant someone was watching. The work stole my time. But worse, it stole the things I didn't even know. I was losing my laughter, my wonder, my softness. I stopped imagining. I stopped singing. I stopped dreaming of anything except making it to the next meal, the next hour, the next breath. But there were moments, tiny ones, when something would break through. A bird landing nearby, a breeze that cooled my neck, a memory of my mother's voice, faint like wind through leaves. And I'd hold on to that. I'd let it carry me through one more row, one more chore. There was a rhythm to the labor, a cruel kind of music and repetition. My hands became calloused, my shoulders strong, but my heart stayed sore. I began to measure myself not by years, but by seasons. How many harvests had I survived? How many winters had I endured? Childhood wasn't counted in birthdays, but in the number of tools I could carry without stumbling. I envied the younger ones when they first arrived, their skin still smooth, their eyes still wide. I wanted to warn them, but I didn't, not because I didn't care, but because nothing I said would prepare them. You only understood once the work began, once the sun marked you with its heat and the ground wore your knees down to bone. There was no room for stories, no space for play. Even smiles were rare, like fruit that only grew in secret places. But still, we found ways to hold on to pieces of ourselves, in whispers during water breaks, in shared glances that said, I see you, I know you're tired too. In the smallest acts of resistance, letting someone else rest for a second longer, shielding a younger one from being noticed. We became each other's protectors in a world that gave no protection. The work tried to crush us, to make us forget we had ever been anything other than labor. But every now and then, something in me rebelled. Quietly, fiercely, I'd hum a tune no one taught me. I'd imagine my mother smiling. I'd remember that once, before all this, I was a boy who wanted to run. And even though my legs now carried only weariness, that memory ran inside me still. That's how I survived, not just by muscle or by will, but by holding on to the flicker of something the work couldn't take, the flicker of a boy who still lived beneath the weight of it all, waiting for a moment, just one, when he could breathe without fear and stand still without being ordered to move. There comes a moment when the body no longer listens to fear, when the mind stops obeying the voice that says, stay low, stay quiet, stay alive. That moment came to me in the dead heat of a summer afternoon, when the air was so still it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I had been working since sunrise, sweat dripping down my back, fingers raw from tying and lifting and dragging. My legs ached, my chest was tight. But it wasn't the pain that moved me, it was the silence. A silence so deep it rang in my ears. The others were scattered across the field, heads down, eyes forward. No one was looking at me. Not the watchers, not the older ones. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something that had no name. Not hope exactly, not courage, just movement. I dropped the tool I was holding. It hit the dirt without a sound. My feet began to move before I realized it. First a step, then another, and then I was running. Running like I did when I was small and free and chasing nothing but wind, only this time. I was running away from the weight, from the orders, from the years that had stolen my name. The grass whipped at my legs, branches scratched my arms. I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the distance growing between me and the place that held me down. For a moment, just a moment, I believed I could make it, that the trees would open, that the forest would swallow me whole and keep me hidden, that I would find my mother waiting at the edge of some river, arms wide, smile real. But freedom is a sound, a loud one. My footsteps cracked twigs, my breath was too heavy, and it only took a moment before they heard me. Shouts tore through the air, footsteps behind me, fast and furious. I pushed harder, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. But I was young, and they were fast. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, and then I felt the ground disappear. My foot caught a root. I fell hard. The sky spun. The sound of running feet closed in. I knew it was over. They didn't speak when they found me. They just stood above me, catching their breath. One of them grabbed my arm. The other looked down at me like I was a broken tool. They didn't punish me, not right away. Sometimes silence is worse than any scolding. They just dragged me back, their hands iron on my skin. I didn't cry, not this time. My tears had dried somewhere in the trees, but something else grew in their place. Something colder, something stronger. They didn't trust me after that. I was watched closer, given harder tasks, spoken to less. But even though they tightened the rope, a part of me had already slipped through. I had tasted motion. I had felt what it was like to move by my own will. And once you feel that, truly feel it, there's no going back. Even if your body is bound, your spirit starts pacing, waiting for the next chance. That was the day I learned escape isn't always about getting away. Sometimes it's about realizing you still want to, that you still believe in the possibility of something else, even if you can't see it yet. And if you've stayed with me this far, if these words have found a place inside you, then I ask you not just to listen, but to walk this road with me. Subscribe to this channel so this story, and others like it, can keep living, can keep reaching hearts that need to remember and understand. And if you feel moved, leave a comment or share this with someone who needs to hear it. What comes next is not the end, it's only the next step in the journey. It began with a whisper like most forbidden things do, a word passed from mouth to mouth, never spoken during the day, never in the open, always in places where shadows could protect it. They called it a school, but it wasn't like any school others would imagine. There were no desks, no chalkboards, no bells to mark the hour. It lived in the spaces between fear and hope, lit by moonlight, hidden behind the weight of silence. The first time I was taken there, I didn't know what to expect. I followed an older boy named Caleb after the workday ended. We waited until the lights went out and the night wrapped the camp like a blanket. Then we slipped between sheds, crouching low, moving quiet. He led me to a small shack near the edge of the woods. It looked like nothing, just another place to store broken tools. But inside, there were faces, familiar ones, people I had seen in the fields, tired and silent. But here, their eyes were awake, bright with something I didn't recognize until later. It was hunger, but not for food. It was for knowledge. At the front was a woman. Her name was Miss June. She didn't work in the fields anymore, too old, they said. But her mind was sharp as a blade, and her hands held scraps of paper like treasure. She had once been taught to read in secret by her grandmother, long before the rules became stricter, long before they started watching every movement. And she had remembered it all. Now, she was giving it to us, bit by bit, carefully. At first, it was letters shaped, scratched into dirt, drawn with fingers, repeated in whispers. A for apple, B for bread, C for child. We said them over and over until they stuck in our mouths like sweet syrup. Some were faster than others, some couldn't keep up, but no one was mocked, no one was left behind. That shack wasn't like the world outside, and there, we were equals. We were minds, not tools, souls, not property. We took turns reading from pages torn out of books, pages someone had smuggled in and protected like gold. They were wrinkled, stained, sometimes incomplete, but we devoured them. Poems, psalms, bits of stories, words that painted pictures bigger than the fences, words that spoke of places where people chose their own paths, where boys became men without carrying chains. I remember the first word I ever read alone, light. It was written in charcoal on a piece of cloth. Miss June pointed to it, and I said it aloud, light. It felt like I had swallowed the sun, like something impossible had become mine. That night, I didn't sleep. I repeated the word in my mind over and over. Light, light, light. Because if I could read one word, I could read another. And if I could read, I could learn. And if I could learn, then maybe I could one day write. And if I could write, then maybe, just maybe, I could leave behind something that couldn't be erased. We met twice a week, sometimes more when the nights were quiet. There were close calls. Times when someone almost saw us. Times when we had to scatter and pretend we were looking for tools or water, but no one ever told. We protected each other because we knew what was at stake. Learning was resistance. Understanding was rebellion. Every letter memorized was a stone thrown at the wall that held us. Some of the older ones used what they learned to send messages. Small notes hidden under firewood or inside folded cloth. It was dangerous, but it meant we weren't alone. It meant we could organize, communicate, believe in more than just surviving. I watched boys who barely spoke during the day stand tall at night, reciting verses, asking questions. I saw girls who carried water like it weighed nothing raise their hands with trembling joy because they had read an entire sentence. And I, this boy who once thought he'd never be more than his labor, began to believe he could think, could reason, could know. The night was our teacher, the stars our lamps, the hush of the trees our walls. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and in a place where nothing belonged to us, that meant everything. The world outside tried to keep us in the dark, but in that little room, with words whispered like prayers, we lit a fire no one could put out. It didn't happen the way I thought it would. There were no trumpets, no loud declarations, no line of people dancing in the fields. The day the chains fell was quiet to quiet, almost strange, like the world itself wasn't sure it had really happened. For so long, I had carried the weight of captivity in my bones, not just in the things I was forced to do, but in the things I was made to believe, that I was less, that I didn't own myself, that freedom was a word meant for other people. So when the moment came, it felt unreal, like a dream someone else was having, and I was just standing in the middle of it. I was working that morning, same as always. My hands were muddy, shoulders sore, the sun already high in the sky. I was older now, not a boy anymore, not yet a man. Somewhere in the middle, I'd learned to move without drawing attention, to work without losing myself completely. That day, there were whispers, something stirring among the older ones. I saw Caleb pause longer than usual, his brow furrowed like he was doing math in his head. Then I saw Elsie walk past me, her hand brushing mine, just a touch, but it was enough. Something was different. By midday, one of the overseers disappeared. No word, no instructions, just gone. The others looked nervous, uncertain. That's when we knew something real was happening. People started to murmur, not loudly, not excited, just questions. What now? Is it over? Are they coming back? No one had answers. Then someone came running from the road. A man we hadn't seen before, dust on his boots, sweat on his face. He shouted something about orders and papers and proclamations. I didn't understand it all, but I understood the part that mattered. You're free. Free. The word didn't land at first. It hovered above us, floating like a cloud that refused to rain. We looked at each other, unsure whether to believe it, whether to hope. We'd been disappointed before. Promises had been broken. Safety had been a trick. But then one of the older women, her name was Bessie, dropped the sack she was holding. let it fall. Then she straightened her back, slower than I had ever seen her move. It cracked with age and pain, but she didn't flinch. She stood tall, and she said, I ain't picking that up again. Not today, not ever. That was when it became real. One by one, others stopped working. Some laughed, short and shaky. Some cried, heads in their hands. A few just stood still, like they were afraid to breathe deeply. Me, I looked down at my hands. They were rough, scarred, strong. I flexed them and realized they were mine now, fully, finally. And in that moment, I remembered my mother, her voice, her arms around me, the song she sang that last morning. I had carried her with me every day, and now it felt like she was standing beside me again, whispering, you made it. The hours that followed were strange. No one knew what to do. Freedom didn't come with instructions. We were free to go, but to where? Free to stay, but for what? We gathered in small groups. We asked questions. We looked for leaders. Some left immediately, walking with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Others stayed behind, unsure whether the news would be taken back, whether someone would come and say it was all a mistake. I sat beneath a tree that evening, the sky turning gold above me. I listened to the voices round me, some joyful, some scared, all changed. I felt something rise in my chest, not a cheer, not a cry, just a breath, a full breath, the first one in years, one I didn't have to measure, one that belonged to me. That night, we lit a fire not because we needed warmth, but because we needed to see each other's faces. We sang, not loud, not in chorus, but one by one, each voice adding a note to the air. The song didn't have a name. It didn't need one. It was the sound of souls returning to themselves. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept moving, kept wondering what came next. But for the first time, I didn't feel caged by the question. I was no longer property. I was a person, a boy who had grown up to fast, a man shaped by loss but not defeated by it, a survivor. The day the chains fell didn't erase what came before. The pain, the years, the things taken from us, they didn't vanish. But something new was born, a quiet fire, a name we could say out loud, a direction we could choose, even if we didn't yet know the road. And in that moment, beneath a sky wide with stars, I realized freedom isn't a finish line. It's a beginning, a slow, stumbling, sacred beginning. Freedom didn't taste the way I thought it would. It wasn't sweet, not at first. It was quiet, awkward, like trying on a coat that didn't fit yet. One I'd seen in dreams, but never thought I'd actually wear. In the beginning, freedom felt like standing still in a room with no doors, just the knowledge that I wasn't being watched anymore. But the shadows still clung to my back, like they didn't know they were supposed to let go. I had been told I was free, that I could walk away, start over, find my life somewhere else. But where? With what? My hands were strong, yes, but all they had known was toil. My mind was hungry, but the world didn't open its books to people like me. I had no land, no money, no family left, and the roads I could take were filled with other people just like me, confused, wandering, carrying wounds that didn't show on skin. Some folks left right away. I watched them disappear down dusty paths with only the clothes on their backs, and dreams so loud they made their footsteps echo. Others stayed behind, not because they were afraid, but because they didn't know how to live any other way. Me, I tried to move forward. I left that place and walked for days, sleeping under trees, asking for work in towns that didn't want to see me. Some doors closed before I even got close. Some eyes followed me with a cold that no chain ever carried. Freedom meant no more overseers, but it didn't mean welcome. It meant possibility, but it also meant rejection. Hunger didn't vanish with the laws. It waited, it watched, and it followed us into every new beginning. I learned quickly that to be free didn't mean to be safe. It didn't mean people would treat you right. It didn't mean the world was ready for us. Some wanted us to disappear, to fade into the soil and never ask for more. But I couldn't fade, not after everything I'd survived. So I worked. I took whatever jobs I could find, fields, kitchens, stables. I kept my head down, but my eyes open. I listened. I learned. I remembered every word Miss June had taught us. I read every scrap I could find. I began to write my name again and again, like I was trying to carve it back into history. My name, not a number, not a tool, a name. I met others on the road, some broken, some building. We shared what little we had bread, stories, warnings. We talked about the ones we lost, the songs we still sang. We tried to make sense of a world that had used us and then released us without a plan. But even in all that confusion, there were moments that made it worth it. The first time I got paid for a day's work, not much, just a few coins, but they were given, not taken. The first time someone asked me what I wanted, I didn't know how to answer, but just being asked felt like a door swinging open. The first time I slept without checking over my shoulder, without jumping at every noise in the dark. Little things, but they were mine. Freedom was not a sunrise, it was a slow burn. A candle flickering in a room full of wind. It took time. It still takes time. Because freedom isn't just the absence of chains, it's the rebuilding of a self that had been torn apart. It's the claiming of space in a world that told you not to exist. It's the right to speak, to rest, to dream, to fall in love, to raise children without fear of them being taken. It's the right to grieve and to grow. And it's also the burden of memory, because to be free and forget is to let it all happen again. I carry the past like a scar, not to relive it, but to remember how far I've come. Every night I still speak to the ones who didn't make it, the ones who never saw the day the chains fell. I tell them their fight wasn't in vain, that their names live in my voice, that their strength carried me here. And if freedom means anything, it means I get to tell this story in my own words, on my own terms, not whispered in secret, but spoken aloud. That is what freedom means to me. I've lived many seasons. My bones speak before my mouth does now, and my hands shake when I reach for anything to fast. The world has changed around me in ways I never could have imagined when I was a boy. Roads are paved where they're used to be mud. The fields are quieter now. The trees grow taller, and the sky feels just a bit wider. But even as everything changes, the weight of the past never leaves. It walks beside me, silent and steady. Sometimes I wonder if the wind still carries the voices of those we lost: my mother, Elsie, Moses, Ruth, Caleb, Clara. So many names etched into my heart. I try to speak for them now, because they can't speak for themselves. This story I've told you, every word of it, is more than just memory. It's a bridge, a path for those who never saw those days to understand what it costs just to be able to walk freely. People say time heals all things, but that's not the whole truth. Time forgets, too. And that's what scares me most, that one day, these stories might fade like smoke in the sky. That the pain, the strength, the songs, the stolen childhoods, the quiet resistance in secret schools, the first breath of freedom, all of it might be lost to silence. So I speak now, with what little voice I have left, to ask you, don't let that happen. Remember us, not as victims, not only as survivors, but as people hold people who dreamed, who fought, who lived, who endured. Our history is not just pain, it's courage, it's legacy, it's truth, and truth must never be buried. If you've listened this far, I thank you. From the deepest part of me, you've carried my words, and in doing so, you've carried the memory of so many who came before. I may not live to see the world you build, but I believe in you. I believe you can be the voice that protects the past and reshapes the future. And now, before I fall into silence once again, I ask something of you. If this story touched your heart even a little, please leave a like, not for me, but for the memory of every voice that was never heard. Leave a comment. Tell us what you feel. What you carry now that you've heard this. Speak their names, because every comment is a flame that keeps our history from going dark. And when you're ready, continue this journey. There are more stories, many more waiting for you in our playlist. Stories of hope, loss, resilience, and humanity. You'll find the link in the description or in the comments below. These aren't just videos. They're voices, lives, truths, and they're calling out for someone to listen. Don't stop here. The road goes on.